All right, Shabbos, say good morning. A good chodesh to everyone. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar. Haba Aleinu L'Tova. To thank Stephen Teri Czinn for dedicating all the shurim and drashos this month in memory of Teri's father, Dr. Harry Kahn, Tzvi Hirsh ben Yosef HaKohen, on the occasion of his 10th yahrzeit. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for Adar, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's grandfather, Zechariah ben Zechariah, and his grandmother, Dinah bas Dov, Zichronam Livracha. To thank our Daf Yomi, our week of learning sponsors, Yehudah and Buchwalter, in commemoration of the Shloshim of Rabbi Yehudah's father, Usher, Zelig ben Yaakov, Yehudah, HaLevi, Buchwalter. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Alan Wiseman, in memory of his father-in-law, Charles Neuman, Zechariah ben Yisroel, and Jacob and Julie Blumenfeld, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Jacob's great-grandfather, Mordechai ben Yosef. And of course, we dedicate our learning today in the schos of an aliyah for the neshama of Chaim Moshe Cohen, Zichron Livracha. Chaim Moshe Cohen was the young boy who was killed in our community in the tragic biking accident. If many of you may remember, you might not be able to put the face to the name, but he was a young man. He used to come to the shir for a very long time. He would ride his bike here every morning and would come to the shir. Probably a little while ago, he stopped. A very, very, very sweet boy, a very sweet young man, and just a tragic situation for his family, for our community, actually the same age as my sons. Incredibly sweet neshama, always had a smile, was always, when he came, was always one of the first people here in shir, and a very sweet boy. We just hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah, and his family a nechama. Well, so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamid. We are picking up Emir Hashem at Chavtes Amud Beis 29b. We have a lot to do today. We left off, let's actually pick up 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, about 15 lines down from the top. Let's just start from there and make our way. Amri lo duchuli alma halachi hi ben Nazir, v'halcha b'mufla samach leish kamifligis. So remember again, we originally started with a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, namely trying to understand why is it that a father has the ability to make his son a Nazir, yet the mother does not. So Rabbi Yochanan said, halacha l'moshe misinai. Rabbi Yossi said that it is a din in chinuch. A din in chinuch. The Gemara wanted to align this with a machlokes tanoim, but now the Gemara says, no, in reality, everyone agrees that this indeed is a halacha l'moshe misinai, that it is a father who has the ability to make his son a Nazir and not a mother. So what's the machlokes then between Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Savar, mufla samoch leish d'Rabbanan. Rabbi holds that the ability of a boy who reached onast nedarim, the age of neder maturity, even before he's reached the age of physical maturity, that he has the ability to make nedarim. Rabbi holds that is a din d'Rabbanan. And therefore, va'asya da'oraisa, dachi d'Rabbanan. The da'oraisa, namely the halacha l'moshe misinai that says that a father can make his son into a Nazir, is docha the d'Rabbanan of mufla samoch leish. Rabbi Yosef Yehudah Savar, mufla samoch leish da'oraisa, whereas Rabbi Yosef Yehudah holds that no, the concept of mufla samoch leish is indeed a da'oraisa, and therefore again, the da'oraisa mufla samoch leish, the fact that the boy has reached the age of neder maturity, prevents his father from going ahead and making a neder nazirus on his behalf. Good. So another possibility is the chuli alma kedei lechancha b'mitzvos. Well, so the other possibility is that everyone agrees that in fact the ability of a father to make his son a nazir is a din in chinuch, and therefore what's the machlokes? So the Gemara says umufla samach leish d'Rabbanani, and everyone holds that halacha l'maisa, the fact that when a boy reaches the age of neder maturity, even though he has not yet reached the age of physical maturity, that he has the ability to make nedarim for himself, that's a din d'Rabbanan. And therefore Rebbe Savar, asi chinuch d'Rabbanan v'dachi mufla samach leish d'Rabbanan. Rebbe holds that chinuch, which is a d'Rabbanan, right, there's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan to be mechanech one's son, the mitzvah of chinuch ultimately comes and sets aside the din of mufla samoch leish. Rabbi Yosef Yehudah Savar ad she'yageh le'onas nedarim. Rabbi Yosef Yehudah on the other hand holds that halacha l'maisa, who holds that until he reaches the age of actual neder maturity, kasavar lo asi chinuch d'Rabbanan v'dachi mufla samoch leish. He holds that the d'Rabbanan of chinuch does not go ahead and set aside the mufla samoch liish. Fine. So lema hani tanai ki hani tanai. So let's say the machlokes tanaim align with each other. This Sanya, very interesting case. Ma'aser Rabbi Chanina shediru aviv ben Nazir. So we'll see, there's a story. Rabbi Chanina, one time his father undertook a neder naziros on his behalf. So literally what's happening over here is Rabbi Chanina is a kid, although the Gemara is going to discuss exactly what age he was. So Rabbi Chanina's father undertook a neder naziros on his behalf. And ultimately they brought the boy in front of Rabbi Gamliel. So it's very interesting. Rabbi Gamliel wanted to see, was the father's declaration on behalf of the son effective? Rabbi Gamliel assumed, what did this hinge on? This hinged on whether or not the boy, Rabbi Chanina, well, he was just Chanina then, Rabbi Chanina had reached the age of physical maturity. If Rabbi Chanina had not yet reached the age of physical maturity, then the father's neder naziros on behalf of his son would be binding. If he did reach the age of physical maturity, then the neder on behalf of his son would not be effective. So Rabbi Gamliel is investigating. So the Gemara is later, heavy shtei saros and lo heavy shtei saros. So Rabbi Yossi Omer later and he gila onas the nadarim in love. Rabbi Yossi says no, he was investigating as to whether or not the young boy Chanina had reached the age of neder maturity or not. So listen to this. It says Rabbi Gamliel is conducting this investigation. Young Rabbi Chanina says to him, Amar lo, Rabbi, al titzta'er lebodkani. Rabbi, there's no need for you to investigate. Im katanani, b'shil abba. If I'm a katan, ultimately I'm a Nazir because my father took a neder on my behalf. Im gadol ani, but if I'm an adult, b'shvil atzmi. I'm going to go in and be a Nazir anyway. Why? Because I want to be a Nazir. So we'll say, listen to this. Rabbi Gamliel stood up and kissed the boy on his head. Amar muftach ani bazeh shemara halacha b'Yisrael. I am absolutely confident that this boy is going to grow up to be someone who is a posek. Ultimately, again, who teaches and delivers halachic rulings in Klal Yisrael. Amru, they said, Lo hayu yamim mu'atim at shahora hora b'Yisrael. It was not long until Rabbi Chanina, in fact, became a great Talmud Chacham and one who delivered Piskei Halacha. I will say it's very beautiful. Why was Rabbi Gamliel? Why was Rabbi Gamliel so taken with this young boy? So I'll say, if we go with the idea that the whole reason why a father would take a neder naziros for his son is because of precious, right? Like we saw in the Rush, that ultimately, again, a father is trying to teach his son the need to be able to abstain from certain things. Ultimately the goal is moderation. That's ultimately the goal. But sometimes in order to reach moderation, what do you have to do? You have to swing the pendulum to the other extreme. This is the Rambam's idea. Right? The Rambam's whole yisod is you always have to find a derech hamamutza. You always have to find the middle path in life. But sometimes in order to find the middle path, you first have to go to the extreme of where you currently are, so that ultimately, again, you settle back somewhere on that middle path. So therefore, it appears that Rabbi Gamliel was so taken by this boy. Because it's one thing for the father to make an neder naziros on behalf of the kid. Okay, so the kid is just passive in that he doesn't have any choice. But for the child to say, listen, one way or the other, I'm accepting this upon myself. If I'm a katan, my father can do it for me. If I'm an adult, I willingly accept it. To be able to have that level of emotional maturity while being such a young boy is such a dramatic display of greatness. Rabbi Gamliel was just confident that such a person like this would be able to go ahead and make an impact for Klal Yisrael. Incredible. So let's analyze the story. So according to Rabbi Yehudah, who holds that a father has the ability to make a neder for his son only until the son reaches the age of neder maturity. And I will say, just to be clear, we are presupposing that neder maturity precedes physical maturity. So according to Rabbi Yossi, who holds that therefore, again, even before the child becomes a physiological or biological gadol, the father cannot make nedarim for him if he reaches the age of neder maturity. And by the way, as I mentioned yesterday, the age of neder maturity is the age at which a child understands the dynamic of nedarim. What does it mean to make a neder? Who am I making a neder to? And what are the implications and ramifications of making a neder? So according to Rabbi Yossi, who holds that a father only has the ability to make a neder on behalf of his son until the son reaches the age of neder maturity. So what happens? So we understand that what he means. If If I'm still a katan, I'll be a Nazir because of the vow of my father. El Rabbi Damra Ad Shiyavi Shtei Saros Vim Gadol Ani Eye B'Shvil Atzmi Ha Birshusei Da'avua Koyim. Here's the problem. If the son did not yet display top of lamed, did not yet display signs of physical maturation, then at the end of the day, he is still in the rishus of his father. Ela da'amar ehei b'shvil abba, ehei b'shvil atzmi. Rather, ultimately, again, what the son was saying is like this. If I have not yet displayed signs of physical maturation, I will be a Nazir because of my father. And if I have displayed signs of physical maturation, I will be a Nazir of my own volition, i.e., I've undertaken this on my own. If he has, in other words, if I have two heirs, in other words, if I've spread signs of physical maturation, then ultimately, again, the Nazirus is mine. But ultimately, again, if not, ulubasov kam benazirus davua. The icy b'mitzi mai. They will say, what happens if in the middle of this neder nazirus, the son were to develop signs of physical maturation? What would happen then? So the Gemara says, Hanich Rabbi Yosef Yehudah da'amra ad she'yageh la'onas nedarim. So according to Rabbi Yehudah, all of this works well because he holds that it's not a din in physical maturation. Rather, what is it? It's a din in neder maturation. But according to Rebbe, ultimately who holds that it's a din in physical maturation, what is there to say? So listen to this. The Gemara says, Amri l'Rebbe lekatakanta ad Yosef delay v'Yosef davui. I will say it could be that according to Rebbe, who holds that all of this is dependent on signs of physical maturation, if the son were to develop signs of physical maturation in the middle of his neder nazirus, interestingly enough, what would he have to do? He'd have to observe two periods of Nazirus. One to satisfy the original neder of his father, and a second to go ahead and satisfy his own neder Nazirus. Fine. Shall I say this? So this brings this particular sugya to an end. So halacha l'maisa, how do we paskin? So I will say, so listen to this. It's actually interesting to see how the Rambam blends these two halachas together. So this is in Hilchos Nazirus, Perek Beis, Halacha Yud Gimel. So first of all, the Rambam paskins like this. So I will say, at what age does a young man have the ability to make nedarim for himself? So remember, we have a fundamental machlokes over here, Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi. Is it physical maturation or is it neder maturation? So first, the Rambam paskins, Katan she'gir la'onas nedarim v'nadar b'nazir, hari ze nazir umevi karbanosov. So we'll say, we paskin, it's onas nedarim. This is actually very interesting. So whereas in everything else in halacha, maturity is determined by physical maturation, when it comes to nedarim, we determine adulthood or maturity by neder maturation. So as soon as the boy enters into the age of onas nedarim, so I will say, when is onas nedarim? So it sounds like as soon as the boy has entered into his 13th year, between the ages of 12 and 13, already again that, at least according to the Rosh and the Rambam, that's called onas nedarim, and therefore if he makes a neder, and we're confident that he knows what he's doing, that neder is binding. So I will say, hear this? The boy is not yet a gadol, right? Halachically, he's still a katan in every other way, yet halacha l'maisa, his nedarim will be binding. He says, "Va'avapi shadayin lo hevi shtei saros," right? Even though he has not yet brought physical, right, signs of physical maturation, nevertheless, his neder nazirus will be binding. Now the Rambam goes on and he says, "Va'ish madiras beno katan benazir afa b'ishla bala onas nedarim." So we'll say salach l'maisa. Now here we go. We'll say so. The Rambam, it's interesting because the Gemara brings down these halachas in the reverse. The Rambam changes the order, right? So the Rambam starts with the halacha that a boy could go ahead and begin to make binding nedarim once he reaches the age of neder maturity. That's halacha 1. Halacha 2, a father has the ability to make his son into a Nazir up until when? Up until the son reaches the age of neder maturity. Onas nedarim. But the Rambam says, a mother does not have the ability to make her son into a Nazir. Why, says the Rambam? V'davar zeh halacha mipi akeh b'hakabala fu'eno noeg b'shar nedarim. So we'll say the Rambam Paskins, like Rabbi Yochanan, namely, that what? This is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So we'll say there it is. So there is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that says that a father has the ability to make his son into a Nazir. The Rambam points out that this is the only type of neder that a father could undertake on behalf of his son. Why? Why the only type of neder? Why? Again, the best answer, halacha Moshe Misinai. Mother can't do it. Why? Halacha Moshe Misinai. So I will say, so this is how the Rambam paskins. Halacha l'maisa, if the father, so number one, let's reverse the order. Number one, halacha Moshe Misinai, father has the ability to make his son a Nazir. Only is it din by father, and we'll say, when could a father make his son a Nazir up until what point in time? What we call Onas Nidarim. The time of neder maturity, which we're defining ultimately again as between the ages of 12 and 13. He has not yet exhibited signs of physical maturity, but ultimately again has reached the age of neder maturity. So the Rambam then goes on and explains the halacha l'maisa, the rest of the details of this nazirus, but for our purposes, this is enough for us. Again, I just want to point out everything we saw in the Mishnah, namely, again, if the son objects, relatives object, so again, all of that is true. The Rambam Haskins like all of that. So again, Rabbi Yochanan, halacha l'Moshe Misinai, this is unique. I will say, just to be clear, a father doesn't have the ability to make a neder on behalf of his son in any other situation. Right? It's only dafka in a nazirus, and that is because it is a unique halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Incredible. I will say Mishnah on Lamed Daf. So that closes out that Mishnah. Mishnah says as follows: Ha'ish migalech on nazirus. So we've actually made reference to this. So we'll say this is actually a very strange Mishnah. The reason why it's strange is because the Rosh holds that the way the Mishnah is actually written is fundamentally incorrect. And the Rosh actually reframes the entire Mishnah. So I'll say we are going to go in accordance with the reading of the Rosh, because it's clear actually just from the Gemara and Amud Beis that that's how the Gemara is going to read this Mishnah as well. So let's at least begin to read it, and then I'm going to bring you to the Rosh on the bottom left hand side of the page. So here we go. Ha'ish, let's introduce the concept at least. Ha'ish migaleach on the zeros aviv, bein hali isha migalachas on the zeros aviyah. So we've actually seen this concept before already. Namely, a son has the ability to go ahead and satisfy his own personal naziros obligations with monies left over by his father. So just the case that we're dealing with over here is father was a Nazir, father died before he had the ability to offer up his concluding karbanos. So there's a pot of money that was set aside ultimately again for karbanos, for concluding Nazirite rites. So now the son is a Nazir. We'll discuss exactly the case. Son is a Nazir. We should introduce us to the idea that a son has the ability to use the money set aside by his father, but a woman does not have the ability to use the monies set aside for her father. So let's say you have a case of where the father was a Nazir, set aside money, died. The daughter is a Nazir. Daughter is or Nazira, right? She can't use the leftover monies from her father for her Nazirite vow, right? Or for her Nazirite, karbanos. Son can. Fine. So I'll say the Gemara now says case. What's the case? I will say so now I'm going to take you down to the Rosh for just a moment. So you see the Rosh. The Rosh is on the bottom, on the left hand margin. Go all the way down to the bottom. I'll say it's the wide lines on the bottom of the Rosh. I actually meant to Xerox it, to copy it and blow it up, since we're going to really be reading it for a little bit. So we'll say, here's what we're going to read the Mishnah out of. All right, so here we go. The Mishnah says as follows, right? So the Mishnah says, according to the Rosh, so we'll say, see here, so the Rosh himself says, I have a different girsa. Ha'ish migalech al nazir savi and ha'ish migalachas al nazir savi. Ketzad, what's the case? So I'll say, first wide line on the bottom of the Rosh. So misha haya hu va'aviv nazir. So we'll say, case number one is where father and son are nazirim at the same time. They're nazirim at the same time. So we'll say, I'm reading from the Rosh. I'm reading from inside the Rosh. It's the last wide lines in the Rosh. So misha hayahu va'aviv nazirim. So we'll say, so ultimately again, the case is where father and son are nazirim at the same time. Vehifrish aviv ma'os stumil nazirosav, and ultimately again, father went ahead and separated out money. Then I will say, now the father left unspecified funds, right? Remember again, Everything we talk about is always by unspecified funds, because we learned about this. What happens if the father specifies the funds? What happens? And then he died. And we'll say, what happens? You know this. We've spent a lot of time on this. What's the halacha? Chatos, Yamamelach, Ola, Nidava, Shlamim, Nidava. So this case only works when he left an unspecified pot of money. So father died, he left an unspecified pot of money. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Rabbi Yossi, Hare'elu Yiplu Nidava, She'ein Zeh Megalech al Nazir Sav. So we'll say, listen to this. In the Rush's version, the halacha is like this. If father and son were Nazirim at the same time, right? So watch this. Father and son Nazirim at the same time. Now, it doesn't mean that they became Nazirim at the same time. It just means that their Nidarim overlapped. So I will say, if that's the case, and now father dies before offering up his concluding karbanos, Rabbi Yossi says, son cannot use those monies for his own obligations. They both say, rather, what happens to the money? Nidava. What's the logic? It appears that ultimately, again, since the son was a Nazir at the same time of his father, he had his own obligation. So because he had his own obligation, therefore what? He cannot use the monies of his father. That's case 1 in the Mishnah, where they are so father and son have overlapping nidrin. They're starting to Nazirim at the same time. Father dies without offering up his concluding karbanos, leaves behind a pot of unspecified money. Son cannot use that money. Rather, that money goes to Nidava. Second case in the Mishnah, continuing again in the Rush. However, Misha Haya Aviv Nazir V'Haya Lamos Tumin Umeis. I will say, what's case 2 in the Mishnah? Case 2 in the Mishnah, father's a Nazir. Set aside a pot of money, ultimately for Naziris. Then we'll say, then what happened? Father died. After the father died, what does the son decide? After the father died, I want to become a Nazir. And I want to become a Nazir with the understanding that I want to use the money left over by my father, the unspecified funds, ultimately for my karbanos. Rabbi say, in that case, V'amra ben harini Nazir, amra shegaleach al ma'os abba. I'm going to become a Nazir on the condition, or the expectation, that I'm going to use the funds of my father. Zehu shemegaleach al ma'os aviv. Ultimately, again, that is a case, ultimately, of someone who can go ahead and utilize his father's funds. So I will say, that is how the Rush ultimately, again, understands the case of the Mishnah. So we'll say, so 2 cases. Case number 1 is where father and son were Nazirim at the same time. If that's right, and now father dies leaving a pot of unspecified funds, son cannot use those monies. Logic seems to be, since he had his own independent obligation, he cannot use his father's money to go ahead and satisfy his obligation. Conversely, if father died with the pot of unspecified funds, and then what? And then son decides to become a Nazir, and son expressly says, I'm becoming a Nazir, and using the money of my father to satisfy my obligation, halacha l'maaseh works. That's called a case of Zeu Megaleach al Ma'os Aviv. One who goes out literally again, Megaleach takes his haircut, but it means does his concluding ritual rites or Nazirite rites with the money of his father. Oh, say beautiful. That's the Mishnah. So again, we didn't read the Mishnah inside. We read the Mishnah according to the Rush. Tosas also has a similar girsa, but we'll say that's the girsa we're going to operate with. Beautiful. And we'll say Gemara. 4 lines up from the bottom. I'll say the truth, I don't remember another Mishnah like this, where the Rush, literally again, the Rush's girsa is the exact opposite of the Mishnah. To the point where I'll say that if you want to understand this Mishnah, you actually cannot read it inside as it's printed over here. You have to read it as Rush says. It's just incredible. Says the Gemara. We'll say, my time, it's so, gives you like a new appreciation sometimes for the Mefarshim. It's kind of like, especially if you look at this Parshas Truma. So we'll say, can you imagine learning Parshas Truma without Rashi? Can't learn Parshas Truma. Some Parshas, maybe you can get away without Rashi. Parshas Truma, no idea what it's talking about without Rashi. But also what you have to appreciate is that what? Rashi, learn Parshas Truma without what? Without Rashi. That is pretty incredible. Right? The Rush learned the Mishnah without the Rush. So I'm just pointing out, it just gives you a new appreciation what we have, sometimes we look at Gemara and okay, it's difficult, but Baruch Hashem Zachinu, we're so privileged. We have all of these wonderful Rabbeim on the page who are teaching, who are helping us to understand the Daf. Imagine again the Amelos they must have had to figure it out without all of the tools. It's absolutely incredible. Good. So we'll say Gemara. My taima. So we'll say, what is going on over here? So we'll say, so really what the Gemara is asking is as follows. There's two embedded questions in this, which is number one, why does a son have the ability to use the leftover unspecified funds of his father to satisfy his own ned and nazirus? And by the way, and a daughter does not. And a daughter does not. So we'll say, I just want to point out, there's another embedded question. So we'll say, if you remember again, 2 days ago, 2 days ago. 2 days ago and 3 days ago. Now, remember again, right, 2 days ago and 3 days ago, remember we spent a lot of time on the drush of Karbano, right? What's the drush of, what does Karbano teach us? What does Karbano teach us? You need to use your stuff to affect your own kapara. So really what the Gemara is asking is really like a threefold question. Number one, what's the source of this halacha? That a son who became a Nazir after the death of his father could use the leftover unspecified funds of his father to satisfy his own Nazirite obligations. Right? Now, right? So number one, what's the source? Number two, what about Karbano? What about Karbano that says you have to use your own stuff to affect your own atonement? And number three, what about a daughter? Why is she precluded from doing this? All of that in one little word. My time. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Halacha hi ben Nazir. So we'll say once again, what's the answer? What's the answer? Halacha Moshe Sinai. Say halacha Moshe Sinai, that there is such a concept like this. And I'll say, obviously, once you say halacha Moshe Sinai, the halacha Moshe Sinai doesn't just tell you that it's possible, it also tells you what? The parameters. So we'll say very specific parameters, namely, it's talking about a son who becomes a Nazir after the death of his father. They do not have concurrent overlapping Nidri and Nazirs, otherwise the son would have his own obligation, couldn't satisfy the obligation with his father's money. So the halacha Moshe Sinai says that if the son becomes a Nazir after the death of his father, and the father left over what? Unspecified ma'os stumin, then Einach Inami, and the son becomes a Nazir with the express condition that he's going to use his father's money, then it works. So the Gemara says, so Pshita, okay, fine. If it's halacha Moshe Sinai, what more is there to talk about? Teri Czinn, the ben yoresh es aviv bas lo. So I will say, now listen to this. So the Gemara says, what would I have thought? So maybe this is a din in Yerusha. As I was saying, maybe the reason why this doesn't apply by a daughter is a very simple thing. A daughter doesn't inherit in the presence of a son. Right? So I will say, again, leaving aside, I'll say, obviously, again, there are ways to halachically structure one's estate, right? With certain, we'll call it pre-death gifts. If one wants a daughter to be able to receive property after the death of the parent, but just straight out halachos, hilchos Yerusha, a son inherits, a daughter does not. So the Gemara says, this sounds like a case of Yerusha, right? The father is dying, the father's died, he left behind a pot of unspecified funds. So ultimately, again, a ben is yoresh, a daughter is not. To which the Gemara says, no. Lo tzricha, the less they elabas. They will say, what about a case where let's say there's only a daughter? So again, father died, left behind this pot of unspecified funds, there's only a daughter. Ma'u detema, what would you have thought? Yarshin gemirin la. So the Gemara says, I might have thought that halacha l'maisa, perhaps this money is governed by the general halachos of Yerusha. Kamash malon, no. Kamash malon halacha. Kamash malon say halacha, that no, this money we're going to see is actually not governed by typical hilchos Yerusha, and therefore again, a daughter would not inherit it. So there is a specific halacha Moshe Sinai that says if father leaves behind this pot of unspecified funds, and you have a son who after the death of his father decides to become a Nazir, on the condition that he could use his father's funds, he's allowed to use the money for that. But that is a very specific halacha Moshe Sinai, and ultimately, again, this money is not really shaykh to general hilchos Yerusha. Quite incredible. We'll say, all right, there's an interesting tosis on this also, but we'll go weiter. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, so let me ask you this question. So pligi rabbanan alei Rabbi Yossi o lo pligi. So I will say, so here's what's interesting in general. in general about the Mishnah. Right, so we'll say. So remember again, you have the Tanakama, right? You have the Tanakama that says, "Ha'ish megalech al nazirus aviv, ve'na isha megalachas al nazirus aviha." Right, and then ultimately again, you have the position of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, "Hare elu yiplu l'nedava." Ultimately, again, the money falls to Dava. So the shaila is, do the Rabbanan arguing on Rabbi Yossi or not? V'imtim silomar, and if you hold ultimately again that the argument v'imtim silomar. Pligi, Aresha, or Aseifa. Ultimately, again, are they arguing in the first case or the second case? They both say, take a quick look at the Rush. Sorry for just a moment. Not the Rash, but the Rush. So we'll say, so the Rush says as follows. This is on Lamed Amud Beis. Lamed Amud Beis. So ultimately, again, Ibayiluhu, Pligi Rabban Alei Rabbi Yosef, Tinsor Pligi Aresha, Tafiluhu Aviv Nazirin, Yigalech Al Ma'os Aviv, O Aseifa, Tafilu Nazir Achas. We'll say, so again, one part I did not read in the Rasha, will say, is the position of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says in the Mishnah, Hari'elu Yiplu Linedava. Rabbi Yossi holds that, in the case of the Mishnah, the money falls to Nedava. The money falls to Nedava. So I will say, the Shaila is, what case, if any, are the Rabbanan arguing on Rabbi Yossi? Now, again, so now I will say, now you're going to see the reason why the Rush switched around the reading of the Mishnah is because the way the Gemara is currently understanding the Mishnah clearly indicates that the Gemara read the Mishnah like the Rush. So watch what's happening over here. Let's do this inside the Rush. So we'll say, here's the Shaila. Do the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Yossi or not? Right? And if you hold that they disagree, which case do they disagree on? So look at the Rush. Yigaleach al-ma'os aviv. So we'll say, so remember again, the Reisha case, what was the Reisha case according to the Rush? Father and son are Nazirim at the same time. Right? Now remember again, what did we say? What did Rabbi Yossi say in that case where father and son are Nazirim at the same time? Yiplu l'nedava. In that case, son cannot use the money of his father. Rather, halacha l'maisa, the pot of unspecified funds goes ultimately again to Nedava. So I will say, see, here's the Shaila. Are the Rabbanan arguing on that case? Right? That's the Reisha case. O Aseifa. I will say, look at the Rush. Dafilu Nazir Achar Misas Aviv Eino Megalech Delesle Halacha. Or maybe the Rabbanan are arguing on, so I will say, let me take a step back for just a second. What's driving the Gemara's question over here is that Rabbi Yossi is mentioned by name in the Mishnah. Now, in general, whenever you have a Stam Mishnah, and then you mention an opinion by name, what does that seem to indicate to us? That there's machlokus between the Tanakama and the opinion mentioned in the Mishnah. So you have a Mishnah that quotes a case, right? So case number one is what happens. Father and son are overlapping Nazirim. They will say, what's the halacha when father and son are overlapping Nazirim? What's the halacha? Right? Rabbi Yossi says, son can't use the money. The pot of unspecified funds is Yiplu Nedava. So the Mishnah explicitly articulates the position of Rabbi Yossi. So are the Rabbanan arguing on that? Right? In other words, is there a machlokis over here? Do the Rabbanan hold no, even in the case of overlapping Nazirim? That's what? That the son has the ability to use that money? Are they arguing there? Or perhaps they're arguing on the second case. What's case number two? Case number two in the Mishnah is, father was a Nazir, then Rabbi will say what happened? Set aside money, had a pot of unspecified funds, and then I will say, what happened? Father died. What did the Mishnah say? In that case, what's the halacha will say? What's the halacha? Son could use the money. Or are the Rabbanan arguing on that case, and perhaps they're fundamentally disputing, maybe there's no halacha l'Moshe Misinai. In other words, what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, here we go. Pligi Rabbanan alei Rabbi Yossi. We'll say first, second line from the top, Lamed Amud Beis. Are the Rabbanan arguing on Rabbi Yossi? Olo Pligi. And I will say, if you say that the Rabbanan are arguing, Aresha or Aseifa, are they arguing on the first case or the second case? So we'll say, here we go. So Tashma, case that Amra Ish Megalech on the Zeros Aviv. So we'll say, what's the case of where we say that a man could use his father's leftover unspecified funds for his own Neder Naziros? Here we go. Mishahaya Aviv Nazir, Behefrish Aviv Ma'os Lenaziruso, Umeis. So we'll say, here it is. By the way, here's the Brisa, and now you'll see why the Rush changed the Girsa. Because the Brisa aligns with the Rush's reading of the Mishnah, or the Mishnah aligns with his reading of the Brisa. Watch this. Ala ish megalech al nazirus aviv. Now that's right. You have what's the case of a son who could use the leftover unspecified funds of his father to go ahead and satisfy his own ned and nazirus? Here we go. So Mishaya aviv nazir, the father was a nazir. Tzvi Hirsh aviv ma'os naziruso, and now this father set aside money. He had a pot of unspecified funds for his own nazirus. Umeis, and now the father died. And now what does the son say? Son says, to honor my father, I'm going to become a nazir, and I'm going to use the money that my father set aside. Rabbi say, what's the halacha? Zehu shemegaleach al ma'os aviv. That is a case of where the son could use his father's unspecified monies. Rabbi say, what happens? So again, what's the important nekuda? What's the important detail? When does the son become a nazir? After the death of his father. Aval. Misha hayahuva uva aviv nazirim. Rabbi say, father and son were both nazirim at the same time, right? Concurrently during nazirus. Vehefrish aviv ma'os naziruso. And the father separated out money for his nazirus. Umeis, and the father died. Hare elu yiplu linedava dir Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, I will say again, Rabbi Yossi holds, no. In that case, the money falls to nedava, and the son cannot use this money, right? So I will say that's, and Rabbi Yossi said, beautiful, right? Now that's the reading. The way we just read this now, that's the way the Rush reads our Mishnah, right? And that's position Rabbi Yossi. However, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehudah Amru Zehu Shemegaleach Al Ma'os Aviv. On the other hand, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehudah hold that no. Even in that case, the son could go ahead and use the father's money. So I'll say, what do we just see over here? Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that if father and son had concurrent nidre nazirus, then father dies and left over a pot of unspecified money, the son cannot use that money. Yet the other Rabbanim, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehudah all hold that even in that case, the son can use the father's money. So I will say, what do you see from here? You see from here that the Rabbanon disagree with Rabbi Yossi in the case of overlapping Nidre Naziros. So I will say, it sounds like everyone agrees that if the son became a Nazir after the death of his father, halacha l'mayr, so the son could use the unspecified funds left over by his father. What's the machlokes case? Where father and son were Nazirim at the same time. In that case, Rabbi Yossi holds that the halacha l'moshe misinai says that what? Son cannot use the money of his father, yet the Rabbanan hold, even in that case, son can use the monies of his father. I asked the Gemara, Boy Rabba, Yesh lo shnei baros, listen to this. So now the Gemara is going to ask a series of questions. Yesh lo shnei banim nazirim mahu. We'll say, watch this. What happens if father died and he left behind two sons who are nazirim? So we'll say, so now what's the shayla, right? So the father left over a pot of unspecified funds, and now he has two sons who are nazirim. What happens to the money? Mo. Hilchasa Gemirlan called the Kadim Galach. So I'll say, do we say the Halach Moshe Sinai essentially says that what? Whoever finishes their neder nazirus first gets to use the father's unspecified funds, and all of that money goes to the first son to reach the finish line for his nazirus. O Dilmo Yerusha Gemirla Upal Gahavi. Or maybe Rabbi will say, maybe what? Maybe no. Maybe since both sons are technically entitled, this is governed by the halachos of Yerusha, and therefore the money is split between the sons. So okay, that's question one. Question two. By Rabba, Bachar upashit mao. Wow. Let's say, to make it a little more complicated, let's say the two sons who survived their father, one of them is a Bachar. One of them is a Bachar, and one of them obviously is not. So let's say, so now what do you do with the pot of money? Hilchasa Gemirla. So we'll say ultimately again. So do we say, listen, this halacha l'moshe misinai, and therefore halacha l'maisa essentially either the first one gets the pot, right, or they split the pot evenly. O dilma yerushahi v'chihechi deshakal pishnayim hachi megaleach. Or I will say maybe not. Maybe this is governed by some halachos of Yerusha, and therefore what? The Bechor will get what? The Bechor will get a double portion. So we'll say, see the Shaila? So again, we understand that what's driving this is a halacha l'moshe misinai. The real fundamental Shaila is the halacha l'moshe misinai somehow governed by the halachos of Yerusha or not? V'imtim saloma Yerushahi. And ultimately, again, if we say it is governed by Yerusha, ulafum d'shakil migaleach, and ultimately again we divide the pot of unspecified funds in accordance with the halachos of Yerusha. Ubechulin hu de'islei pishnayim aval behekdish lo. So we'll say, but again, in general, the halacha of pishnayim only applies to unconsecrated funds. But perhaps double portion of Bechar will not apply ultimately again to this type of money that's left over for sacrificial purposes. So the Gemara says, "O Dilma, kevan dekani legilu achloshna," or maybe not. Maybe since the money ultimately again is set aside for a specific purpose and it's usable by the sons, maybe halacha lamaisa again, the halachos of pishnayim would apply. Fine. So we'll say another question: Aviv Nazir Olam v'hu Nazir Stam. Aviv Nazir Stam v'hu Nazir Olam Mai. Now, what's another fascinating shaila? Let's say the father and the son have different types of naziros, right? The father is an eternal nazir, and the son is a regular nazir, or vice versa. So I'll say, now the father dies, leaves behind the pot of money. So I'll say, can the son use the pot of money? Ki gimer and hilchosa b'stam naziros. So I'll say, do we say that this halacha, that a son has the ability to use the leftover leftover pot of unspecified funds of his father, this satisfies own Nazirite obligation is only when? In a regular case of naziros. So, Odilma, Loshna, maybe it doesn't matter. In other words, father and son do not have to have the same type of naziros in order for the son to go ahead and use the pot of money left over by his father. So the Gemara says, Vimtin Salomar, Hacha Idi V'Idi Naziros Tara. Or we could say, maybe in this case, both father and son are observing what we call Naziros Tara. But watch this. The Gemara says, By Rav Ashi, Aviv Nazir Tamei V'Hu Nazir Tar, Aviv Nazir Tar, V'Hu Nazir Tar. I will say, what about the following case? Let's say the father had set aside a pot of money. But do you know why? You know why? Because the father became Tamei. And so he had to go ahead and what? Bring a whole bunch of... Then what happens? He dies before being able to use that pot of money. Could the son use that pot of money for now the regular concluding sacrifices of a Tahar Nedr Naziros? So I will say, see all these questions. So what's the halacha? What does the Gemara say? Teku. So I will say the Gemara leaves the question ultimately again unanswered. Teku to all of these asked questions. I will say, what about the fundamental shaila that we have? So just very quickly in the 1 minute that we have left. So I will say, so here's what we're left with. We are left with a halacha Moshe Sinai that says that a son could go ahead and use the unspecified funds left over by his father in satisfaction of his own Ned Nazirus. So I will say, what's the machlokes? The core machlokes in Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan, I will say, is what case does the halacha Moshe Sinai apply to? Does it only apply to a case of where the son became a Nazir after the father? Or does it even apply in a case of concurrent Nidri Nazir? So Rabbi Yossi holds that it only applies in a case of where the son became a Nazir after the father. The Rabbanan hold even concurrent Nidri Nazir. So I'll say it's incredible. The Rambam Paskins and Hilchos Naziros, Parak Ches, Halacha Tesvav, like the Rabbanan. Namely, that the Halacha Moshe Sinai applies in both cases. Both the case of where the son became a Nazir after his father, as well as when there were concurrent Nidri Naziros, the son is permitted to go ahead and use the leftover pot of unspecified funds in order to satisfy his obligation. That is the halacha Moshe Sinai. Hadron alach misha amar elosai shkayach. All right, Chevron Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. A guten chodesh.